Welcome, Enrique, and thanks for joining me today on the Legends of Recruiting conversation. For spending 25 years in recruiting myself and doing this, I want to have authentic and interesting conversations with my recruiting leader friends about the industry and talk shop about trends and where things are going. And I've had a front row seat, and I've found over the years that art of recruiting is often what's missing from recruiting success, the storytelling, the candidate experience, the personality, authentic conversations. And my friend Enrique Washington in Portland, Oregon, he's a recruiting legend, and his career's worked at top brands as a recruiting talent leader from Nike to Electronic Arts and ESPN, and I mean, talk about interesting stuff there, and Pinterest. And so I'm sure you got great stories for sure from those years, and I'm excited to talk with you today. And thank you so much for taking time and to learn more about your story and perspective. Uh,
Great. Thanks for having me, Paul. This is exciting, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
right on. Well, to kick things off, why don't you walk me through just a few of your recruiting highlights in the story? Like, tell me the Enrique journey.
Yeah, it's interesting because how I got into recruiting, I think, and most people may have had a similar path. Feels that way after I talk. When I'm having conversations with people about like how did you start recruiting, you don't come out of college saying, "Hey, I'm going to go be a recruiter." I was actually headed for a career in pharmaceutical sales. I had interviewed with three different companies. We were close to getting to offers, and I had an interest in wanting to be in the Pacific Northwest. And I had sent out 150 resumes, all paper resumes and cover letters. It's crazy to think how much time it took me. I don't even know how much it cost me, but I remember doing that. And I got one reply from a company called Graphics, technology company in the 80s. This was a very successful early stage company. It was private equity, venture capital funded that ultimately went public and did really well and is still doing very well as a company. They responded and had a role that was a recruiting role. And it was a recruiting role and a learning and development role. It was kind of a dual role. And I was like, okay, I get the learning and development piece, but I don't know much about the recruiting because what I knew about recruiting was what I had experienced at the university level when they would come on campus to recruit students. And so that was sort of my entry into recruiting. I came out and interviewed at Metagraphics and fell in love with the Pacific Northwest. They made me an offer, and I quickly pivoted from not going down this path of pharmaceutical sales. Now I'm in recruiting. And most of my friends are like, well, are you in sales? Or are you, um, what is recruiting? And because at the time it was actually called staffing. And so the language has changed so much then. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But that's where I enter. And so that first entry in the recruiting, I spent about a decade building the foundation, learning about recruiting. And I had a wonderful mentor by the name of Dave Woolsey, who had come out of being in executive search. And so Dave understood the fundamentals of good recruiting, how to source talent, how to make cold calls, how to prospect, how to build pipeline lists. Like I was learning all of this as an in-house recruiter. And over the decade, I was very fortunate to work for some notable brands. One you mentioned, Nike, some other cool brands. One was FLIR Systems that was on the cutting edge of developing sort of this infrared technology, which ultimately made its way into sort of mainstream consumer markets where everyday consumers could go and buy a product to help with sort of infrared application. And so the first 10 years, learning how to recruit, learning how to interview was very useful. And then this opportunity sort of presented itself. And I'd always wanted to think about being an entrepreneur, sort of in making money and doing good. And I had a little side hustle when I was in college doing resume writing. But I wasn't really making much money, but I was making some. But this opportunity had kind of come up in conversation with two of my former colleagues from Nike about, hey, we should start a recruiting company. We should focus on small companies, mid-sized companies that don't really know how to recruit well and how to make good selection decisions. And so that happened. And that took me 16 years into my career. I didn't really know how long it was going to be, but it was 16 years. And like a magic happened. Magic happened in that 16 years, Paul. Let me tell you what happened. Number one, I um, had a chance to work and step into some of the most amazing brands around the world that were developing consumer products, apparel, footwear, outdoor stuff. I got a chance to sort of witness that industry kind of explode. The other thing, I became really obsessed with my craft, and I'm a learner by nature and I love to develop. And so I decided I want to be an expert in the selection of candidates. Like, I want to have that type of understanding. So, what do? I go back to school. I pay for this to get a master's in industrial and organizational psychology from Kansas State. And I had my requirement is I got to be there once a year on campus for about 3 weeks. And I did that. And like that sort of fueled this additional knowledge that I didn't have. And it didn't stop there. I started to really think about thought leadership and being an expert. And so what that meant was, okay, I got to write more. So I started to write some, published an article in Diversity Executive on diversity is not a numbers game. I started a podcast called The Talent Lab. Before podcast was really mainstream, I went on and raised $6 grand from customers to pilot a podcast. And it wasn't going to be about recruiting. It was going to be about the sort of the life cycle of talent. How do you find talent? How do you integrate them into a company and bring in experts to sort of talk about those different components? I co-authored a book. I got asked about what was the most important part of my job as a recruiter. And this person I was speaking to was looking for authors. And we got to talking about the importance of like understanding the role and the business. And she said, well, can you write a book on that? And I said, well, it's not really, it's more than that. And so I ended up writing this book called Competencies at Work, Providing a Common Language for Talent Management, because it was very eye-opening for me in recruiting. If you didn't know what you wanted to find in candidates, it made it very difficult to find a candidate. It's like, hey, I'm going to go on a vacation. I don't know where I'm going to go, but I'm going to get on the road and I'm going to drive. You can do that, but it will take you far longer than you said, hey, I want to go to New York City. And you know how to get to New York City. You know, you get on 80 and you go all the way across the country. So it was kind of that thinking. So the 16 years in having this recruiting company helped me grow, helped me develop them as some amazing people. And I felt like I became an expert, a true expert. And then I reached this pivotal moment after like helping all these brands hire amazing leaders. I don't even know how many jobs we fill, but we fill a lot, from sort of the early professionals and eventually made our way into executive level roles where it was CEO oriented board roles. Really cool stuff where you got to see companies from a different lens. And then I decided I want to take all this that I learned and I want to go and apply it in-house, because at this juncture, a lot of companies were seeing value in executive search firms, but they were starting to build this internal capability of executive recruiting, not to not partner with executive search firms, but they wanted to have that capability. And the first time I experienced that was at Nike. Michael Lemming, a legend who's no longer living, sort of built this amazing executive recruiting function. It was the first that I saw and sort of got to experience. And so I go back in-house, and I consider myself fortunate. I got to do this work at Electronic Arts. Love video gaming, grew up playing video games.
I was
And
curious
then
what the pull was. There had to be a good
it was,
backstory in EA.
yeah, it was really one, I loved video games. I had played many of the games that they had published. And so I feel like I had a connection to the company. And then the person recruiting me, I had a connection to him, right? And that's always a pull in recruiting, right? Is someone you may know and someone you respect, that where you can grow and learn. And that was a big part for me. And it was the first time I was going to take all this stuff that'd been in this consulting kind of ecosystem, and I was going to package
Mhm.
it and operationalize it internally. Very different. And I did that, and I didn't stay long, but I stayed long enough to set up the function because I got the call for my dream job.
What,
And this is
how
pivotal.
to interject? Like, so did you tell
Yeah.
your mom, like, see all those video games? It paid off. See, I was there's a job, there's an industry here. I wasn't wasting my time.
Well, it's funny. When I was going in, I was researching the company, and they had done all this research started to emerge on the value of playing video games.
Hmm,
Like they had been studying how it builds flow in
hmm,
work and work productivity. They had studied how it creates better connection with family members and the family. And so I didn't tell my mom that, but I just said, "Hey, mom, like it's a good thing, right? There's some good stuff happening with the publishing of video games." But like that was special because they really let me come in and be the expert
hmm,
on a global scale. And then I got my dream job. You know, sports paid for college for me.
hmm,
Sports changed my life. It
hmm,
sort of helped me understand um, all the pieces of life, like successes and failures and meeting people and getting along with people. And this notion of like always having to be working on things. Like sports sort of taught me that. And that's how I got to college in this track and field scholarship. So I get the call from ESPN and I'm like, whoa, this is like next level. The only problem is I had to move to Connecticut. So I had to convince my wife, let's pick up the family and go to Connecticut. But I'm fortunate to have worked for many brands, but above all, like that one was special for me because I didn't just get to touch recruiting. I got to touch professional recruiting, executive recruiting, and I got to work on this really cool project that still is relevant today. I'm 3 weeks there at this company. I moved across the country. I'm still processing the move, Paul. I'm like, man, I can't believe I live in Connecticut. I left the Pacific Northwest. What have I done? But I'm on campus and like everything's breathing sports. And so I feel alive. I get called into the office by the head of talent management and says, we want to study what the future workforce and workplace would mean for ESPN and then how it could influence the broader Walt Disney Company. I'm like, okay, so what does all that mean? Say, well, we have approval to do this work. We've kind of assembled the team. We have an external search partner, not search partner, a consulting partner, but we want you to lead this body of work. I'm like, wait a minute. You brought me here to build capabilities on executive recruiting and also to lead professional recruiting in some really critical areas. Now you want me to lead an enterprise-wide project that's going to explore the future workforce and workplace of future. Like, I
You
didn't even know
shed a
what that
man
meant.
tear. You're just like, oh yes, I
I
want
was
to do
like, what? I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, I can say, can I think about it? And she didn't really want to hear that. She's look, you're going to have a team. Some of the teams are already in place, but we want to give it to you at a place where you can build a charter. I'll run alongside of you for a period of time. But I did that work. We did that work for 3 years before there was even COVID,
Hmm.
which is crazy. Like, and I got to lead that work. Like, and it was probably and that was some of the reasons that ESPN was special for me. Like I didn't just get to do recruiting, right? Because I was always interested in the pieces that connected to recruiting, and this was one.
Hmm.
And it was very fulfilling. I built my leadership, I built my project management skills, but I got to really look inside of like how this could work because nobody in the world was thinking about the future, the workforce and workplace of the future in this way. Because we wanted to solve for the next generation of content viewers, how we're thinking about content, who we're going to be recruiting, where were they going to be? Because not everybody wanted to move to Bristol, Connecticut. So it was really exciting. And I can't go into a lot of details around it. I'm happy to, of course, but in the interest of time. But that really helped create these amazing experiences to me. That's why ESPN was so special outside of just the work, but I was a part of the sports ecosystem, and I still am in touch with many, many people. And so, from there, like I'm there, and I get this thinking, like I'm an athlete, right? Athletes continue to work on their body, they work on being better. Okay. That's what they do always. And that's where I was. And I had wanted to pursue a background of a PhD. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to build my craft. And they sponsored me going back for a PhD in organizational leadership. And I didn't know where it was going to take me. And I leaned in, and I'm at the end of that process today. But it's now kind of led me to this tenure track assistant professor role teaching sport management. And I'll still do some other things most likely, but I'm very content and I'm very happy where sort of my professional journey has taken me. It's a long-winded answer, but it's how kind of my journey, Paul, of where I am today.
You're a great case study, the continual learner. Like you're continually learning, growing. I mean, hey, PhD, man, you're the smartest guy we're talking to. Good job.
Well,
So,
well,
I was curious what have you learned going through the PhD process, which is a different world. We talked earlier about this, and like like how to go the PhD process is different than the normal corporate world. Like, how
yeah,
did you adjust your approach or studying to be successful in that venture versus placing execs at a company?
yeah. One of the things when I went into the program, I wanted to really unlearn what I knew.
Hmm.
I really wanted to go in with sort of this open mind that, hey, I have all this experience, but I want to truly learn it. And the thing that really resonated with me, still does to this day, is I don't know what I don't know. And a lot of our professors would always ask, I would say something like, well, we know in recruiting, like, leaders make decisions because of this. And they would always say, according to whom? Like,
Hmm.
what evidence? So I learned the importance of evidence. And I already knew that because I had gotten this master's in IO psychology. Like, it's all about evidence-based decisions. Companies do it all the time. That's why you have a CFO. The CFO sits down with the president of the board and says, hey, this is our financial state. And here's how it's going to inform some decisions. It's evidence-based. So I learned in the PhD program to ask the question
Hmm.
that I want to understand, and to remove my bias of what I think it is and go and investigate it. Okay. And then think about how does that relate to the practical sense of the world. And though that was the biggest learning for me
Hmm.
is, hey, I want to know why this works or why this doesn't work. Okay. Structure a research question around it, go investigate it, and then learn like, hey, I was wrong, or hey, I was right. Here's why. So that's probably the biggest learning for me.
Think we can get so gut feel sometimes after doing this a while. It's like this is the way it is, but wait a minute, is that the best way, or what's the data say actually? I think that's a great reminder just for me and others. It's like, hey, to always challenge some assumptions that you have, and the data may prove your assumption to be true, and you have more conviction. But what trends? I mean, you've had a front row seat to see a lot of changes in recruiting from the mailed resumes when you were
Yeah.
first
Oh
applying.
my gosh.
Yeah, well, how has recruiting changed over the years, from your perspective?
Yeah. Look, I think there have been a lot of noticeable change. You just touched on one, right? It's like, hey, this notion of the paper resume has kind of gone away. Um, but I think for me, the language and what has really changed, there are two things that really stand out for me, that makes a difference. The experience that the candidate goes to. So I think companies realize as it got more competitive in the workplace, you kind of move from, hey, you'd be lucky to come work for us to, we got to make sure we treat you right. We got to make sure your experience is the best. And companies do that in a lot of different ways. So sort of this candidate experience matters is important. That's shifted because that was not what I was taught in the early stages. This
Mhm.
other one is really interesting that I like to call out is this notion of onboarding. Um, One of my mentors, and someone who I reported to when I was an adjunct at Portland State, Dr. Talia Bauer, studied this 30 years ago when she was coming out of getting her PhD in management. And she tells a story where companies would question, like, why does that even matter? Like, why do I care about the onboarding of someone coming into a company. And so now it's all about that. And she's this global authority on onboarding.
Hmm.
There's a conference on onboarding now, just on onboarding.
So
Like,
what are some onboarding tips? It's like, hey, like here's you don't want someone to show up obviously without an office or an email or they don't your boss is not there when you show up. I've heard many bad onboarding
oh
experiences.
yeah, well, so it's still part of the experience, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like when you date somebody, you know who they are, you think you know them, and you get married, like it kind of changes, right? It becomes real. So you want to make sure there's consistency from the dating into the marriage. And so I always felt like with onboarding, it's like you court these candidates and you get them in, and then you got to stay consistent. Just some simple tips I can tell you that have evolved, and I know she's done a lot of work around this. I talk about this in my existing dissertation, like how it's influencing um, sort of early engagement
Hmm.
with candidates, and so making sure when people come in, like it's very clear, role clarity. This is your role. Like just talking through that, right? This is your role. These are the stakeholders that influence your role. These are the individuals that you need to build relationships with. Okay.
Hmm.
Here's how we build relationships in our company. Okay. It's through results, it's through meet and greets, like that simple tips. And the other thing is like in the first, like I be like there's books out there about the first 90 days. I'd love to see a book talks about the first 12 months because what research shows is that you want to, as your own board, you want to accelerate learning, you want to accelerate impact. And there are a number of things you got to have in place. You got to have goals, you got to have role clarity, you got to have clear goals. Then you got to have expectations of what you want this person to achieve in the first 90 days, 6 months, and a year. Unless you have some of those things of clarity, you kind of go in, you hit the ground running, you figure it out. And sometimes you do, but most often where things fail is when leaders don't have that.
Hmm.
Okay. They don't have that. And I'll never forget the story of this leader I spoke to. He moved his family to Southern California to work for this amazing brand. I won't say the name of the brand. And I call him just to check in. And we hadn't placed him there. I just had a relationship with him. And I wanted to know how he was doing. And he was there 6 months. I thought it'd be a good time to check in. He knew all the basic stuff. He would be on a streak. And then he tells me, I'm no longer there. I'm like, wait,
Whoa.
whoa, like you moved your family. Like what? Did the company file bankruptcy? What was it a merger? What happened? It just didn't work out. And I went back to him some months later and I just was curious because I was starting to study more about onboarding and we wanted to build a model. Like I wanted to unpack his experience. Some of those basic components, role clarity, key stakeholders wasn't in place. He had no goals of what he needed to achieve, like clear goals, using the
Hmm.
SMART model, specific, measurable, achievable, um, and time bound. Like he didn't have those as a vice president. So those are some of the tips. There's a lot more out there. And there's so much more on onboarding, but it's one of the things that has shifted from the time I started recruiting in 1993 sort of modern day.
Enrique, it's so good just getting mission clarity. Like we hired you to do something. Here's how you can be successful. It's like you're re-recruiting them. You're not, you obviously want to get them in the process to interview and accept your offer, but the moment of truth is when they come home to their spouse, like, how was work?
Yeah.
Was it good? And their
Yeah.
friends ask, how was it? And like, that's the moment of truth. Like, what do you want them to say at the barbecue about their new job?
Yeah.
And I think you have control over that. But I think a lot of times recruiters are just like, hey, I'm here to fill seats and then hand it off and moving on.
That's it.
And not thinking holistically about making them stick. So what else do you find separates, average recruiting from great recruiting? Like and you've had great organizations that do amazing recruiting. What separates the good from the great?
Uh, sort of been thinking about this question. Because I knew you'd ask me. Because I think there's clearly a difference. And I'm going to speak from sort of my learning journey and how I got really good at recruiting. And um, like I think about my time at ESPN, I was there 4.5 years. I had one decline.
Hmm. Wow.
I had one decline. Okay. Still kind of not bitter about it, but I was disappointed. Did everything to get it across the finish. I had one decline. Um, and like, why was that? And so I think the mediocre recruiting, it is what I saw early days of recruiting. It's like, you're just trying to fill a role. Like there's no invested interest in the people you're talking to in the business. You want to get people in seats, right? Like that is the focus. And you're upselling something, you're casting a picture that is partially correct and the other part you kind of made up. Like that is mediocre recruiting. Um, and it kind of leads to like, and what I learned is like, if you're the recruiter, you're the expert. You're not only the expert in how you recruit the people, but you're the expert in how you advise the person making the selection decision. You don't get to make it for them, but you do get to help inform them making the best decision. And
Hmm.
there are a number of pieces of things that you need to have to do that, right? To be able to say, hey, we talked about this in the early part of kickoff. Now this is new information. This has an impact. Let's talk about what that means. So I would say there's probably sort of two primary things of great recruiting, right? It's like understanding the need. Like, and I'll never forget an example of this. I had spent all this great time at Nike and I sort of learned about the product creation side so well. I went to Asia, all these different countries in Asia, sort of learning the product creation process. So I got to know that. And so when I'm out doing consulting, having this firm, I have this company wanting to hire this person. Similar, it was just a title, right? So I knew what that title meant, but we got into like the need. I'm like, well, that's part of this role. That's part of this role. And so they started to paint this picture. I'm like, I don't think there's anybody doing all these things.
Hmm.
So I got to advise them. And so it was like understanding the need and helping them like and bringing back data and information to say, here are examples of the same role by companies who do what you do. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, and then the other piece, like I saw so much value in this one, especially when I was at all my companies, but most notably when I got to ESPN, because I was doing that project that was outside of recruiting, is understanding the business, how the business makes money, how it
Hmm.
attracts customers, how it makes products, like the priorities, like understanding that and sitting. And ESPN was easy because I love sports. So I would go and sit with the people that were producing Sports Center to understand how you produce a run a show at Sports Center. What happens when you're live on the air? Like, what are all the moving pieces? I got to go to live events to really understand what it means to produce a college football game, or an NBA game. Like, how does all that happen? And so, understanding the business, because then that's just going to help you. One, what do I need to go find people? Okay,
Hmm.
what questions do I need to ask, and how can I go back and advise my client? Like, hey, the person you're looking for, looking at market data, um, this capability and skill set is rare. So we might want to think about another avenue. And this is kind of where I started to become very intrigued by talent in talent management and like succession planning and sort of development, because all sometimes it's like going out to market may not be the best thing. Thinking about your talent strategy internally, and you can connect it to external pieces, but like was really important. So that was getting into great recruiting for me, because then I could advise leaders in an authentic place and be the expert. And so for me, that's what separates mediocre recruiting and just, hey, I'm just putting butt in seats. Okay. And
Hmm.
I want to just move on to like, okay, let me immerse myself in you, your business, what you need, so I can be the advisor to you to help you make a good decision.
I love that. People who are intellectually curious to actually know what they do in the business and and find it interesting and talk business first and recruiting second. Just there's a different level of
Yeah.
conversation you have with CEOs or hiring managers when you can talk shop, not just filling a role. And I think you're a good strategist and partner. So, all right, let's talk about a mistake. I mean, man, I've
Oh
worked on
man.
hundreds of roles over the years. I've made my share of mistakes. Like, tell me about a mistake you made in recruiting early on that taught you a lasting lesson that may help you later in recruiting.
Yeah, I this was my second job out of college. And by no means did I consider myself an expert at this point. I just was sort of on the journey. I was, still frankly getting to know the place I was living. I was in Oregon. I was still relatively new in Oregon. But the mistake that I made um, was I talked about like sort of the mediocre, like just get butts in seats. Recruiting is so much more than that. The moment you start to talk to people, you establish a connection. And I am naturally, one of my superpowers is relationships and connecting with people.
Hmm.
That is my superpower. And over the years, I've honed in on that superpower. But early in my career, I did not leverage it to my advantage. There was a candidate we were recruiting. He came all the way over from England. And he was his name was Mark. And it was for a role in product creation. And he brought his family over. And I you know, helped him get his interviews together. Like, that all kind of went well. But the mistake that I made, he had developed this connection with me because I was unique. I had just moved to Oregon relatively recently.
Hmm.
So he was really curious about that. I didn't have a family like he did, but I had moved here. Right. And so I could speak to that experience personally. And he wanted more of that. And I didn't have the presence of mind to lean in. He wanted to get together on the weekend. And I said, hey, I'm not really sure I can do it. I kind of had something else going on that I didn't want to cancel. And I probably should have canceled it, to be honest with you. It wasn't that important. But I wanted to keep my commitment because after all, I'm new. I'm trying to get to know people. So I was thinking about myself, frankly, and I shouldn't have. And he wanted to get together. And we never got together while he was here. And that bothered him. So he goes back, gets back to England, um, calls Michael. Michael was the hiring manager. Won't tell you his last name. Calls hiring manager. Says, hey, I can't take the job.
Ooh.
And then he goes as far as to say, I just, I didn't get a chance to meet more with Enrique when I was there in Portland. We just don't feel like we have a sense of the area. Even though I set him up with a realtor that I knew, someone that I personally knew that had helped me buy my first home, had grew up in the area, and I kind of given her the background. So I wasn't completely oblivious to like the experience, but what I should have done was said, "Hey, Mark, let me help you think about your weekend in Portland. You got a family. What do they like to do? What does your wife do? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What's important to your family needs? Okay. What kind of house do you think you want to have? I probably should have not gone with the realtor, but I should have prepped them more on the realtor. I should have met with the realtor after that. And I should have taken them to dinner. I should have given them my own personal tour. And I should have just listened.
Hmm.
Okay. I should have just spent time with them listening.
Moving is such a big leap of faith, and I think there's so many factors outside the job. But the family, are we happy here? What will life
Yeah.
look like here?
Yeah.
So totally
Yeah.
get it.
And it is.
So why do you love recruiting still after all these years and all the ups and downs and drama that can happen on filling roles? Like, what's kept you engaged?
Yeah. I think the biggest piece, um, people that I have met. Um, and I think about my purpose, which is to help individuals achieve their full potential so they'll be inspired to help others do the same.
Hmm.
Right. That is my core purpose. I spent a lot of time with that. Um, and I've gotten a chance to kind of live out my purpose unknowingly um, you know, all of my professional life and seeing people do great things, seeing lives change, seeing people make companies successful, seeing company people not make companies successful, and to have courage to talk about what happened,
Hmm.
um, the learning from others, um, and the other thing I'll say this lastly, like it is the one thing in any company. There are many, but the one thing a company will do, they will have to recruit talent. And like, and every person you hire becomes it's a major decision because it becomes an influence to other things that happen in your business. And like, I love that.
Hmm.
And the
Nice.
fact that I've gotten an opportunity to have that level of impact on people's professional lives, personal lives, and a company. Okay. And being able to see something that I indirectly impact on TV, sitting on the shelf, having people talk about it, that's pretty cool.
I think I love the people side. It's kept me engaged over the years as well. And I also had a sales background before falling into recruiting. So I think there is something about having a sales people background, definitely makes a difference versus trying to just process things and push things in boxes in HR sense sometimes.
Yeah.
What's like a favorite interview question? Like what's your money go to when you pull out that has been a good one you've enjoyed asking over the years?
Yeah, I want to answer that question, and I want to think about it this way because I've grown, I've sort of developed. So my early stage kind of go-to question was always one of the simple ones, but it was why, like why this job? And I was always looking for like motivations, and I still ask that question, right? Because I'm interested in intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, like what really motivates people. It doesn't necessarily predict performance, but it tells you a lot. But the question that I really came to appreciate and understand the most
Hmm.
was at the end of an interview, asking individuals, is there anything we haven't talked about, discussed, that you want to share that you believe is relevant to this
Hmm.
opportunity? And here's what I was looking for: um, self awareness, um, self awareness in terms of someone saying, "Hey, we haven't really talked about, this type of capability you're looking for." And I have some of that, but like I really haven't landed there, right? I don't know that well. I was looking for self awareness. If people would come forth and say, "Hey, I'm interested for all these reasons, but you should know and be fully aware, like this part, I'm not as strong in." The other thing I was looking for is, would individuals step forth and say, "There's one thing I want to share with you that I think is important for you to know, for you to think about regarding my candidacy." And that would speak to, were they listening, the
Hmm.
self awareness, because it was giving them a chance to say, "We didn't talk about this, and it's important because you're trying to do this." Like I wanted individuals who would be able to say, "Hey, we missed something,"
Yeah.
like especially leaders. And that question became more relevant for leaders later in my recruiting journey. And most often, I would get leaders saying, "Hey, this I don't know, I haven't touched this part," or "There's one thing that's really important I want to share."
Hmm. That's good. Let's talk about storytelling because our role as recruiters is to find people who are happy, top of their game, not looking, and try and woo them over. So I guess what have you learned kind of the storytelling and how you pitch the mission and the culture and why they should make the change? What's an example of that, or how's that look like for you?
Yeah, I had been doing this all my professional journey. And I'll be honest with you, when I got to ESPN, it was like next level because, you know, they were all about storytelling. I felt like they were the best in the business. And you know, I wouldn't say that I was doing it a whole lot differently before I got the ESPN, but I can tell you, and how you talk about the story is is critical, and it's captivating people's attention around, hey, let me tell you about the business. Let me tell you about today. Let me tell you about the priorities and like why they matter. And then being able to say, here's how this role connects,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and then this is why I want to talk to you. Okay. Um, like that, setting it up that way and doing it with some energy and some excitement. And then as part of that story, I felt so much value in saying, this is why I came here.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I landed here. And at
Mm-hmm.
ESPN, it was different because I got a chance to talk about those other components, but I got the chance to say, this is why I moved my family from the West Coast to the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And like that testimony, like people got that. Not that I was always having to move people. In most cases, I was. They were going to be in Connecticut, New York, or LA. This is before COVID had hit. Most people were moving, especially at the executive level. But that part of the story and putting myself in the story made a big difference. And
Mm-hmm.
then I had to take that once I started to see it was really working and starting to see people talk about having clear understanding of the business and how it connected to the role, which helped inform some questions. I took my team and we sat down and said, hey, how do we want to tell the story? How do you want to tell the story with you a part of it?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be long, but I said, we have to scale this. Like, what's that framework? What's that model? That when you get on the phone with a candidate, you want to start with the business,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And
Let's
so that's why it's important, right? And that's just some of the framework in which I've used to help captivate people and really get to a place when you get to the offer stage, um, getting to yes is a whole lot easier.
it should be pre-closed. Like, it should be low drama. The offer should be just wrapping up what we already talked to and agreed to, but for sure. But let's shift gears. I'd like to hear your perspective on diversity, hiring, representation. And you've had a lot of experience and led strategies around that in these companies. What works and what doesn't work? And when people talk about that and integrate that into the recruiting strategy and workflow.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I will tell you, when I came into the profession of recruiting, um, it wasn't diversity wasn't new to me because my first master's I ended up um, um, doing my thesis on sort of diversity as it relates to sort of from a cultural perspective. Um, and I just was, curious about it, right? I was curious about how different backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds, gender work together. How do they get along together? And I get to sort of this corporate place, and like one of the first things my leader talks to me about was diversity because I'm in engineering,
Hmm.
mechanical, electrical, software engineering, green engineering. And so there were so few of underrepresented individuals in those roles. Like it was like, okay, we're going to find a way to impact this and you're going to be a critical part of it. I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know what that means. So I ended up, as I look back on it, it was kind of, I wouldn't say it was tokenism, but it was, I don't know what benefit it was, but they got featured in this magazine called Diversity Engineering and Careers as
Hmm.
this recruiter, and I hadn't really done any work in the space. I'm like that in this magazine. I'm like, why? I remember my mom asked me, like, why are you in the magazine? What's the purpose here? I'm like, I don't really know. It wasn't very clear. So looking back on it, like I had the sort of early stages of like recognize, okay, I knew there was some value there. It was important. But what I didn't have then that I have today was like the why. Okay. Understanding the why. And so as I go through this journey over the years, one of the consistent themes that kept appearing most often was diversity. Companies think, hey, I want to hire a diverse candidate. Say, well, we just can't go and find diverse people for you. We can't go out and just find a black candidate or a Hispanic candidate. Like we have to be, um, there are laws around that. And so, I felt like a lot of my time, early stages, was like educating people on like how do you think about what good looks like? Um, look, it's it's a question that we can probably have a 1 hour conversation on. I can share stories with you, but I will get to the other back end of your question around what works and what doesn't work. And I talk about this in my current dissertation where I'm studying the impact of the Rooney Rule on the recruitment and hiring of Black coaches in the National Football League. It's the first study of its kind, sort of engaging directly with the coaches. And what doesn't work is when you try and create this scenario around why of like, hey, because it's going to be good for our business. And I'm getting pressure from my board or from manager. I gotta hire someone that looks diverse in this role. And I remember, I'll never forget this story. I was doing a study, uh, National Academy of Research, National Academy of Sciences. My firm at this time did a study. They're a multi-billion-dollar research organization globally to understand why there were so few Black, Hispanic, and Asian American CEOs at public transit agencies. And I remember when we were doing that study and we were talking about experiences, and there was this one leader who told me this story where he was told by another person in human resources, they brought him a resume and said, you need to hire this person. They're a Black person. We need to get your diversity numbers up. And he says, well, first off, I'm looking at the background. They're not even qualified. And he goes, I can't hire this person. It doesn't make sense. She goes, you have to do it. That doesn't work. And that, later on, I went on to kind of it informed this article I wrote on diversity is not a numbers game. And in that article, then in my study, I talk about there's so much research out there now on the benefits of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Okay, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. There's so much research on how it relates to organizational performance, problem solving, high performing teams, innovation, creativity. I don't have to sit over here on this other side of the screen and say, there are a lot of benefits. The research, empirical research has already spoken. And that makes the case for it. What works is when you think about it fundamentally being a part of your business strategy. Okay. And when you fundamentally have this notion of sort of two core components, sort of leadership executive commitment, okay, and change champions. I'm getting a little tactical here, but those components, right? Like when those things are embedded in any kind of strategy or body of work, when you have clear goals, objectives, and it's threaded throughout the organization, and it's not like we're gonna go do this because we just need to. We're gonna get more customers. Like so, when it's connected in the strategy and it is a part of your talent life cycle, it shouldn't even start at recruiting. Like you should be thinking of looking at your workforce, understanding like, hey, we're gonna expand our business. We want to go into international markets in Southeast Asia. Like that's a cultural thing. We got to be thinking about like people that understand that culture. Or we want to go into Latin American markets. Okay, like how do we think about that? Or this became very popular in sort of the modern U.S. is like this notion of around I lost it. So sorry, Paul, I lost it. But I was going to speak to this notion of around a sort of throwback brands. It'll come to me what it's called, but there's a terminology around it where companies went back into sort of these inner city markets to design product, not just for that market, but like this cultural piece to pull it out. It'll come. There's a term for it. A lot of these brands were doing that because what they were realizing is that like these consumers have a connection with us, but when that's threaded through a strategy and a business approach, it just becomes natural. And like, let me just. I'm going to close on this topic. We don't close the topic. Let me just say this one thing. Um, what I from working with competencies and getting really clear on selection, past behavior is indicative of future behavior. When you develop the muscle and the behavior, frankly, Paul, you don't have to have all these goals in place. Leaders will naturally want to see their teams be diverse. Target's an example of this today. They still embrace it. I remember being at a conference in Washington, D.C. On the organization is called, it was a focus on Black executives. The CEO of Target was at this conference. And he said to this audience, he goes, I don't have to talk about our diversity initiatives. He said, I want to bring my leaders up on stage. And he goes, let me be very clear. The stage is not big enough to have all of our diverse leaders on this stage. We have naturally built this into how we operate. We don't have to tell people to tell us how to do it. We have built it into how we operate. That is sort of the next wave of how we think about this. It's like, it's a muscle. Train the muscle, right? Create the behavior, you know, tying it to your bonus, which companies are doing. And that's almost like forcing people to do it. It has to be embedded. And I'll never forget, I'm at ESPN, president we're on this global call, and he says, we are going this direction as it relates to building a diverse workforce. If you do not want to be on that journey as a leader, you need to come forward because this will not be the right place for you. That message coming from him set the tone. Set the tone. So I'll pause there. I get a little
It's a
excited
real
about
interesting conversation. I the question, let me phrase this right, is there's DEI initiatives
it. Yep.
and merit-based hiring, are they naturally at odds or can they coexist well?
I think so. This merit based, I think when you get into
A hot
trouble,
topic. That's why I'm asking you.
yeah. I don't think they coexist. I think when you start to say, and this was always a challenge for me, right? It's also a part of like, well, I wanted to go and do this study. It's like when you start to tell my recruiting team, hey, we need 6 Hispanics in this role by end of year. It's like, well, legally, we can't, we shouldn't look at it that way, right?
Yeah.
Like that's even the wrong way to look at it. And thankfully, I work for brands that never told me that, but I know there are companies that think that way, right? And I don't know who they are, right? I don't want to sit on this side of the screen and make this declaring because I'll go back to my learnings in my PhD program is according to whom. You can't do the merit-based hiring that way because I don't want to get hired because you need to fill a seat because of the color of my skin. I want to get hired on merit.
Because you're the
I
best.
want, I'm the best. I want
You won the job because
transparency.
you're the best. You got promoted because you're the best.
I won the job. But
Yeah.
here's what I want to know. I just want to make sure. In my study today with these NFL coaches, this emerged a lot. Transparency. Like they have this Rooney Rule that suggests you have to interview 2 underrepresented candidates at interview stage. Many of them are like, I wish we didn't have the rule. We just want fair and equitable practices. We want transparency. We want to know what the process is. We want to know what the criteria is. We want a chance to demonstrate.
Mm-hmm.
And
There's a
that,
quality in sports I love about, like they're like, we want the best linebacker or receiver or kicker. It's like it's the stats and who you are and the culture, but there's a purity about you're the best and the most effective and great team fit. And there's a really interesting piece about that's like the ultimate merit hiring is in sports. I'm just watching, the recent drafts and
Oh yeah.
it's a real time thing playing out. It's much more entertaining than our recruiting because no one's has cameras in us when we're making hires and going through the
Yeah, no,
process.
absolutely. Well, look, and I think what this becomes, and the reason why this has become an issue, right? If you look back at the course of why we're here talking about this, like
Hmm.
it's we know what's interesting. I started my career in 1993, and we're still talking about it.
Hmm.
We're still talking about the same thing decades later. Why is that, Paul? Like, why is that? Like, it's like the definition of insanity. We're doing the same things and expecting different outcomes.
Hmm.
And like, and like, it's puzzling. It's really puzzling. And I think what's interesting and where, people have felt is like, hey, the process wasn't set up to be equitable, and I'll never forget when I was at ESPN, this one leader, executive leader, um, leaves, leaves the company, goes to work for this amazing brand. He gets terminated before he even starts for sexual harassment. Okay, he didn't even fully officially start it. He was just there. This is out in public domain. What I'm sharing here, this is no secret. He gets another job that's equally, if not better. Okay, now he's a Caucasian male. Okay, he gets terminated from that job after a year for similar behavior. 3 months later, the story is the same. He gets another job as executive vice president. And leaders talk about, particularly the Black leaders, Hispanic leaders, talk about how they would not be able to have that narrative. And based on their experiences in equitable processes, because they've often felt it was never genuine. Like they were interviewing them because of the color of their skin. And we go back to that candidate experience matters. Like people can sense when you're interested.
Totally.
They
Totally.
know.
Yeah.
They know, right?
It,
And
it,
so I think that's what curated a lot of some of this debate. It's like, well, like if you're not interested, why interview me? And I'm learning this from these coaches that I'm talking to. I have stories about that too, but it's a great question, and I love that. I love it because my hope is we're not having the same conversation with my kids and your daughter is
Mhm.
our age.
Mhm.
I hope that there will be advancements, but it's going to take generations. I remember one scholar told me, he goes, Enrique, I'm going to be honest with you. It's a white guy, PhD in psychology. We're doing a study in this industry. He goes, I'm going to be honest with you. He said, for this to change, the old guard needs to go away. They got to go away. And he goes, what that looks like is people pass away, people retire. He goes, I hate to say that. He said, but until that happens, the newer way of thinking and looking at things through a different lens won't change.
Good. Thanks for the conversation on that. I appreciate it. Uh, Last question I had was to land on AI. Uh, Kind of a big deal. So, how has AI impacted recruiting that you've seen so far, and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I've gotten a chance to really see AI through the lens of academia. There's a lot of cool stuff happening there that it's going to make its way. It's making its way in sort of the sort of mainstream. I think there's a lot of unknowns, Paul. Like there's a company today that's in a lawsuit based on AI selection in applicant pools, right? That has created bias. And so the human element, when it goes away, I think you're going to get into trouble when you're relying too much on AI. There are ways to use AI to be effective. For example, you could use AI to help you think about curating interview questions. You could use AI in a way to help you think about how you're creating a scope of work, like this, to use that to get some inspiration and ideas. The moment you start to saying, hey, here's this pool of 1,000 people, go and pull all the best people out, but there's some learned behavior around bias based on university, right? For example, because there's nothing on the resume that says, "Hey, I'm black, I'm white," But there are things that trigger bias, systemic bias, right? That can happen with humans. Because I worked for a company, they wouldn't talk to anybody that went to an HBCU.
Hmm.
Wouldn't talk to anybody. Like, would not have a conversation, and frankly, couldn't really tell me why.
Hmm.
It's like that's bias.
Mhm.
Okay, that's bias. And so I think it where it's going to go, it's going to help think about strategy, recruiting strategy a little bit more broadly, but it's still going to take the human touch to implement, to execute, and frankly to evaluate and to
Mhm.
make pivots and to make decisions. Um,
If
but I think what
if you could create an Enrique avatar bot that looked like you, sounded like you, even had some of your personality, and you could have that bot screen 100 applicants and then recommend and score people, would you use it?
that's very interesting. I would be very open to that. But I think, Paul, this, like, um, as executive recruiters, like we all have our own unique styles, right? And not
Mhm.
all styles are necessarily the best style. Um, but when you do that, okay, you also have styles that have different motivations that may not be appropriate. And once AI starts to learn that behavior, then you got that to deal with. So I think, and look, you have that in, you know, humans as well. But with AI, we're looking at it in terms of like, really, like, how does it help with scale,
Mhm.
right? How does it help me take 1,000 people and get it down to the best 10,
Mhm.
right? Like that kind of productivity change is undescribable, right? Like, um to be accurate. I can see, it coming in ways. It's like, hey, here are my interview notes for these 5 candidates. Give me an analysis on who you think's the best candidate. Okay. But what people have to realize, they are the expert, not AI. Okay. It's 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 learning what it's intended to learn. And there's going to be more advances in that. Like, and so having the ability to ask questions, the right questions, or to question things like, well, this doesn't make sense. Like, I know this doesn't make sense. Let me look into that and not solely relying on AI. I'm not so like I that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Mhm.
There's a Dr. Charles Handler is doing this study right now. He's an IO psychologist, um, on how TA leaders are starting to think about AI, but there are not a lot of answers there. Like, we were using it at Pinterest from a business standpoint to, help it with product development, but we were not entrenched in it from a talent acquisition perspective. We did not have common language yet. We did
Mhm.
not have a common practice. A lot of those things were starting to be put in place. So I think that question being asked a year from now is going to look very differently. And then a year from now, it's going to look very differently. The same way, Paul, the same way that the internet was introduced to our workplace.
I think it's the
Okay.
best analogy, just the impact it's making, the speed. It's a power tool. Like the internet can be used for good and bad. I think AI is just can be used for good or bad. And so just how to use it wisely and not be afraid of it, but need to also be eyes wide open on what we're doing. So this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time. Any closing thoughts of maybe we haven't talked about or any thoughts on the art of recruiting in particular?
Yeah, I think, there's an art and there's a science. The art is really, I believe, the human side, which is so critical to even get to very effective selection. I think it you know, it can't, you can't select without the art. You can't have the selection. Like I just fundamentally think there's a that's a big piece. And since starting my career, like one of the things we didn't talk about that really revolutionized the way we do a lot of things in recruiting was the internet, right? And like so much of that, I mean, it took us from how to like store resumes to like how to do searches. And I remember doing this training at Nike on how to recruit on the internet. I had developed this model for how to do that because I came out of tech and I had learned that.
Hmm.
Like I would say, sort of in closing, like there are going to be some other bigger things that come out of AI. And there are going to be some other bigger things that really elevate the art of recruiting. But the human piece, so important. And I don't think that will change in any time soon.
That's a great one to land the plane on. Enrique, thank you for your time and good luck on wrapping up your PhD. And I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for having me. I enjoyed it, and I hope there were some good pieces of information that you would find valuable.
It was great. Thank you.